Waxworks, the 1988 film, was distributed by Vestron Pictures, later re-released by Lionsgate. The film obviously does take place in a wax museum. We have a group of college kids who drop by, they take a tour, two of their friends go missing, and this actually introduces the first two stories in the film, which are actually my favorite segments. Of course, we have the young man who winds up going into a cabin in the woods. He's attacked by a werewolf. The creature is actually very interesting, especially the long pointy ears. It's great makeup. I thought it was a great story. But my absolute favorite was the vampire story, of course. In the story, the young lady walks in and there's a dinner party. The meal of choice is obviously not very appealing to her. It's somewhat of a very raw, bloody meat, and she hides it in a napkin, pretending to be eating. Meanwhile, they are asking about her fiance, yada yada. She later discovers that as she flees from them, of course this is at Dracula's home that she's been dining in. She does not realize that at first, but she wanders into a room, finds the man that is her fiance, and part of his leg is missing, and discovers that they were eating him. I actually really enjoyed that story, especially just the way they just kind of kept it in the dark up until the very end. Of course, she does meet her end. She does not make her way out, and the two remaining friends manage to make their way out of the wax museum. They eventually later return, and Mark, the lead character, discovers that his grandfather had somewhat of a dealings with the curator of the museum. He had previously collected objects from quote-unquote 18 of the most evil people in the world. Not quite true. The film does take a stretch and does have its own liberties here. We do have characters such as the Marquis de Sade, but we obviously have Dracula, we have a mummy, an invisible man, Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, and Frankenstein's monster. We also do have werewolves, zombies, and a few generic creatures like a voodoo priest, a witch, an axe murderer, and a mutant baby. I don't see how that kind of falls into the equation of being part of the 18 most evil people in the world, but whatever. It's a movie who's really questioning it, besides me. So David Lincoln, who happens to be the museum owner, has set up somewhat of a deal with the devil. He has sold his soul in order to gain power and bring somewhat of a hell on earth, which to me comes off as somewhat of a plot ripoff from the Friday the 13th, the TV series. Pretty much the same plot line there, and both were going on at pretty much the same time. So they later do discover, as they themselves are also sucked into some of these museum exhibits. David wanders into a zombie exhibit. He realizes that if he believes or convinces himself that these creatures are not real, he cannot be harmed. But also to some degree, they tend to become immersed in the story that they're literally in. So they tend to some degree, forget who they are and actually become part of the actual story. So obviously, David takes part in the zombie story. Sarah wanders into somewhat of a more erotic theme as she winds up being held captive by the Marquis de Sade. Eventually, David does manage to break out of his prison. He finds Sarah, tells her how to, I guess, sort of conquer this. And eventually along the way, as the film is beginning to wrap up and all of the creatures are escaping from their displays as they've become animated and are preparing to create this hell on earth, David's grandfather's old friend tends to bust into the room at a very convenient time in a typical movie fashion with a group of companions. They battle the creatures and burn down the museum. What we do not, or what the main characters do not realize, is that there is a severed hand that has managed to escape, which leads into our sequel, Waxworks II: Lost in Time, which was a 1992 release. I've honestly never really had too much interest in this movie, and quite honestly, pretty much the only reason I did watch it is because Bruce Campbell is in one of the segments. So he's actually in the second story, which is somewhat of a haunted house or possession type story. It has somewhat of a similar premise of the whole Evil Dead 2 Dead by Dawn. It's very slapstick, and so he's pretty much just beaten throughout the movie or throughout the story, and pretty much just literally winds up just bones by the end of the story. What leads us into the second film is the fact that, of course, the severed hand follows Sarah home, murders her stepfather. She takes the rap for the murder, and she's basically trying to prove her innocence. So they come across this sort of compass type device which allows them to leap through dimensions or into time stories, very similar to the first movie. So they do forget their memories temporarily, and they hop into very notable scenes. One of the scenes, of course, being a Godzilla chase scene. But as we do head towards the wrap-up in the main story, we do have a king who is very envious of his brother. He's trying to take the throne, and he has somewhat of a sorcerer which allows him to transform or temporarily become other persons in order to impersonate him. So the whole deal is he wants to kill his brother and take his place. As the king discovers that David and Sarah are onto him, he pretty much gets into a battle with them, and they time jump across all these different storylines, which at first was quite amusing, but after the first 3 to 5 minutes as they're leaping in and out of stories, it just becomes also just very slapstick and ridiculous. So by that point, they had pretty much already lost me. Eventually, they do manage to acquire another severed hand. David stays behind as he is unable to time jump. Sarah goes back, returns to her trial with the evidence, and miraculously is set free, because apparently reanimated appendages have that power. Apparently also in just very Back to the Future fashion, David has found a way to send a compass to Sarah in the future. So as she's leaving her trial, one is delivered to her, and she obviously makes her way back to the Middle Ages to be with David, and who knows, maybe they lived happily ever after, and hopefully if the compass didn't break and they got tired of each other, they were able to return to the future. As far as the Waxwork series, the first film, obviously I cared for a lot more. Definitely better stories, wasn't as ridiculous, although the 80s are known for just being comical in themselves. They pretty much made a joke of the whole horror genre. They were very cheesy films, couldn't be taken very seriously, and that's the appeal for these films. I definitely do appreciate that, but once again, this obviously was one of the films that I watched during one of my bouts of insomnia. I just go on just crazy kicks watching all kinds of random stuff that I can get a hold of. Definitely liked the first one, not too crazy about the second one, but to each his own. So that's all I have for you today, and I will talk to you later.